Sometimes, it's the best intentions that compel us to give a second chance, but it's not always used as expected, and that can have fatal consequences. Today, we'll talk about how a second chance cost 2 innocent lives. Oak Bay is a small coastal community in Canada with a population of less than 20,000 people. It's a great place to start a family and raise children, with a close-knit local community, quiet and safe, yet very progressive. On December 25, 2017, Oak Bay was filled with the spirit of Christmas. Colorful lights blinked in all the windows of the apartments along the street, and the houses were decorated. Despite the festive atmosphere, the day was marred for some people by the death of a loved one.
Sarah Cotton had spent her entire life in this town. In 2009, she met a man named Andrew Barry. Both worked for the local ferry service, which provided connections to the mainland and coastal regions. There were a large number of islands between which connections and freight deliveries took place. Sarah had previously completed a degree at the University of Victoria and then trained to get the position. Before that, she had worked in a public relations group. She was active and energetic, successful in every area. After they met, her relationship with Andrew developed very quickly. After a while, it moved to the next level as the couple started a family. They married in 2011. Daughter Chloe was born, and in 2013, Aubrey came into the world. As usual, the beginning of the young couple's relationship was promising. It seemed they were sincerely in love and treated each other with great respect. But everyday life can ruin even such loving couples. After the birth of the children, the relationship deteriorated significantly. Another difficult phase was the tragic death of Andrew's father, who died in a car accident in 2013. Against this backdrop, Andrew's behavior began to change dramatically and became very troubling. The man exploded over trivialities, provoked conflicts during pleasant situations, after which he insulted his wife. As it turned out, Andrew's father had previously kept the young man's bad temper in check, but now their main protector was gone. In this context, Andrew behaved more freely and even aggressively. Initially, the young mother tried to smooth over all conflicts and hide them from others, hoping that all this would simply stop when the difficult time for the family was over. Unfortunately, the situation only worsened. One day, the couple got into a heated argument over child support.
This was the first time Andrew made a threat. If the problem wasn't solved, said the young father, he would be willing to kill the whole family. Such threats frightened Sarah. His outbursts of anger became increasingly uncontrollable, and his behavior more unpredictable and disordered. When the man became angry, he started driving recklessly and caused accidents on the road. At first, Andrew tried to do this without the children present, but later he completely lost control and allowed himself such escapades even when the girls were in the car. It became increasingly clear that this once strong marriage had become a real threat to the lives of Sarah and the girls. They were growing up in a very unfriendly and unsafe environment that now began to threaten their lives. But the woman still tried to save the marriage. Several months passed in this state until Sarah finally reached a breaking point. The young mother decided to end the relationship and bluntly told her husband. She insisted that he move out of the family home that very day. Instead of calmly packing his things and leaving the house, Andrew provoked another argument, after which he broke into his wife's bedroom and began to strangle her. She managed to free herself from his grip, after which Sarah took her mobile phone and called the police. Andrew continued to behave inappropriately until the police officers arrived. His violent behavior was obvious. In light of the threats, the young father was quickly arrested and taken to the station. After this incident, Sarah was able to obtain a restraining order that ensured her ex-husband could not approach the children or herself. It seemed the whole family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The man was calmed and brought under control. He stopped his harassment and controlled his outbursts of anger. Andrew moved into an apartment where he lived alone. The ex-wife raised their 2 daughters alone and continued to live with them in the family home. The young woman worked tirelessly, including overtime, to provide the little girls with everything they needed. Her parents supported Sarah and took care of the children while their mother went to work. Her then-husband did not support her financially. A divorce took place, and Sarah received full custody of the children. Due to Andrew's aggressive behavior, he was denied the right to see the children, and child support was ordered. Sarah surrounded the girls with love and devoted all her free time to raising the children. This went on for 3 months until her relationship with Andrew changed for the first time. The man apparently missed them and got in touch. Andrew wrote to his wife and asked to see his daughters, but Sarah refused. The man still insisted, but didn't get what he wanted. At this point, he seemed to change, became calmer, and managed, thanks to the help of a lawyer and witnesses, to appeal the court's decision. As a result, the court order was changed so that the young father was allowed to see his girls on weekends. He now had official permission to interact with his children, of whom he was so proud. The woman had to bring her daughters to their father, but she didn't leave them unattended. Under her supervision, Andrew got along well with the girls. Unfortunately, this was the beginning of a true tragedy, but it was still quite far off. Within a few years, problems arose related to child support and joint ownership of the house. The court ordered Andrew to pay a large amount in back child support to support his children. In parallel, there was a proceeding about the division of the joint family home. The young father refused to pay any amounts for the house. As a result, the court offered Sarah to buy her ex-husband's share of the property, which was then worth $60,000, for only $20,000, minus the child support debts. This meant that she would obtain the rights to the property in this way and have no claims for unpaid support. The woman agreed to these terms. However, Andrew was against such a repayment of the debts and tried to contest this decision in court. During this time, the man often took his daughters to spend time with them. According to the court order, he could do this without the mother's presence. Soon, Sarah noticed increasingly troubling signs. One day, when the children returned, she discovered a spot on Aubrey's head that looked like a wound from a blow. She called her ex, who claimed the girl had accidentally bumped herself while playing. But the next time, according to the girl, her father went even further and tried to touch her in intimate places. He labeled the accusation of molestation as absurd, but Sarah believed her daughter. She decided to act immediately and turned to the Child Protection Agency. An investigation was launched, during which the father's contact with his daughters was strictly monitored. Despite the complaints of the daughter and the mother, law enforcement and child protection officers were unable to find evidence of the man's misconduct and intentions. They simply threw up their hands. The father claimed the child had simply fallen and therefore had a scrape on her head. That sounded plausible enough. The touch could not have been malicious. He had supposedly accidentally touched the girl while playing. The woman insisted that Andrew posed a threat to her daughters. He had previously behaved strangely and suspiciously. The daughters didn't want to talk to him, and the mother wanted them to have no contact with him at all and tried to forbid him from seeing the girls. The custody dispute continued in court. At the end of 2016, Sarah again questioned her ex-husband's ability to care for the children. Once, the ex-husband left the youngest daughter alone in a stroller in a public place while he moved quite far away from her. Furthermore, the mother of the children claimed that her husband had repeatedly spoken badly about her in front of the little girls, which she saw as an attempt to turn the girls against her. The trial began. Each side presented their version of events and claims. In the end, nothing changed. The children continued to live with their mother, and the father could take them during holidays and on weekends. The judge who made the ruling believed that Andrew was a loving father who could offer his girls a lot. The judge had no idea what a cruel mistake he had made. The court decided that the young father's aggressive behavior was only temporary and related to domestic problems in the family. Suspected child abuse was not proven, so the man was given another chance. The parties were given conditions they had to strictly adhere to in order to continue interacting with 6-year-old Chloe and 4-year-old Aubrey. The girls were bright and cheerful children with their own personalities and interests. The eldest, Chloe, had managed to get into the first grade of a local school. During this time, she developed a passion for writing, which was taught to her by her cousin. Chloe was very artistically inclined from a young age and had a sympathetic ear for the problems of her loved ones. Meanwhile, Aubrey was growing up and preparing for school attendance. The sisters proved to be very energetic and creative personalities. In addition to other interests, they developed a growing love for art, especially drawing. The girls were very similar, close to each other, and friendly. In their opinion, Sarah was the perfect mother. She had done a lot both within the family and after the divorce to build a stable bond with her daughters. As ordered by the judge, both parents participated in special training courses in which the father also actively took part. Unfortunately, this was not enough to prevent a violent outcome to the story. According to the custody agreement reached, the girls were to spend Christmas 2017 with their father. December 21st was Sarah's birthday. They celebrated it in the morning with the children, and then Sarah brought Chloe and Aubrey to Andrew's apartment, which was located on Beach Drive. He lived just a stone's throw from the marina in an upscale area of the city overlooking the Pacific coast. However, the man was going through a rough patch at that time, specifically a financial crisis. He quit his job, lost his main source of income, and became addicted to gambling. Against this backdrop, he was unable to pay child support or feed himself and his children. From the beginning, this was a bad idea for Sarah. She didn't want to bring the girls to her ex-husband, but she was obliged to do so by court order. Otherwise, he could complain, and the decision would be revised in his favor. Above all, she didn't want to give the girls to their father over the Christmas holidays. The woman believed this shouldn't happen, but she couldn't influence the situation in any way. Sarah asked her ex-husband to let the girls stay with her because of her birthday, but he immediately threatened legal action, so she was forced to comply. At the entrance to Andrew's apartment, her anxiety grew even more. From a distance, she noticed that the lights in the windows were off. Sarah had hoped that the man might not be home and wanted to drive back with her girls. But her daughters told her that the lights in Andrew's apartment were off at all times of the day, and that this had been the case for weeks. The girls reported that during their visits to their father, they always used flashlights like when camping, and that they enjoyed it. In fact, Sarah already knew that her ex-husband had quit his job in May of that year. Against this backdrop, he had serious financial difficulties, so the electricity might simply have been turned off. She decided not to discuss this with Andrew and the girls now to avoid provoking another conflict and ruining the children's holidays. But Sarah noted in her calendar that she would address the matter later. She was looking for any opportunity to restrict the father's access to the girls, as she believed he could be dangerous for the children. The mother said goodbye to her daughters. They were to stay with their father until noon on December 25. After that, he was supposed to bring them back. When Sarah got home, she saw that Chloe had left behind her favorite stuffed animal. Her mother picked it up and brought it directly to the child. When she knocked on the window of her ex-husband's apartment, both girls appeared through the blinds in their holiday costumes. They smiled and seemed happy. The mother calmed down a bit, gave them the cuddly toy, and left, expecting to see the two girls again in a few days. On Christmas morning, Sarah woke up in an unusually empty house and began to do the usual daily tasks to pass the time until the girls returned. Throughout the day, the woman had plenty of time to clean the house, decorate, and place gifts under the tree. Sarah did her best to make the girls happy. At 2 p.m., Sarah's parents arrived. By this time, the woman was already anxious because the girls were still not back from their father, even though he was supposed to bring them by noon. She sent Andrew several text messages and called him, but he ignored all attempts. She then tried to contact his sister, but she also didn't respond to any of the calls and messages. The situation became increasingly alarming. Sarah then decided to pick up the children with her mother, leaving her father at the house in case Andrew arrived with the girls while they were away. The women drove to Andrew's apartment, but the children didn't appear. When they knocked on the window, it seemed too quiet and empty inside. The heroine of the story couldn't even begin to see what was happening behind the closed blinds. She knocked and called at the window, but no one responded, which made Sarah even more fearful. In their desperation, the women decided to speak with Andrew's neighbors. One of the neighbors said he had heard the children talking early in the morning, and around noon, he heard thuds and noises in the apartment, which hadn't initially worried him, but now seemed very suspicious. According to him, he hadn't seen any strangers around the house. Sarah's and the children's grandmother's concern multiplied, and they immediately called the police and reported the disappearance of the two little children. When the first police officer arrived at the house, he tried to reach the apartment owner, but no one responded, not even to Sarah's cries. The officer then tried turning the doorknob, and to his surprise, the door was unlocked. The light inside was off. After flipping the switch, nothing happened. It turned out that Andrew's electricity had indeed been turned off, as well as the water. He was facing eviction due to late payments for utilities. The policeman took a flashlight and illuminated a gruesome scene reminiscent of a horror movie. The walls and floor of the hallway were smeared with blood. There were splatters everywhere, even on the ceiling. In one of the rooms, the policeman found the lifeless body of a girl on a bed, whereupon he immediately called for backup. The arriving police officers inspected the eerie place with weapons drawn, as there was a possibility that the murderer who had caused the bloodbath was still in the house and could be dangerous. One of the bloody footprints led the officers to the bathroom. There they found a naked Andrew with a slashed throat and several wounds in his chest. He was still breathing, but each breath seemed heavier and heavier. In the adjacent room, Chloe was found on the bed. She was already dead. The child's body showed numerous lacerations and cuts. A bloody bat lay on her clothing. Aubrey was found not far from her sister. Like Chloe, the girl was wearing pajamas soaked in blood. Even on the ceiling of the room, there were blood splatters. Both children had multiple cuts and stab wounds, similar to those their father had suffered. The officers checked the children's pulses several times, but they were already dead. An ambulance quickly arrived at the apartment to treat the injured man. Since the bathroom was too small to accommodate the equipment, Andrew was placed on a stretcher to be carried out of the apartment. At that moment, he regained consciousness, looked at the paramedics, and simply asked them to finish him off. The victim was taken to the hospital, accompanied by police officers who wanted to question him. The officers informed Sarah that her two little girls were dead. She was restrained as she screamed hysterically and tried to force her way into the apartment. Sarah had as many questions as the investigators. How had her two little angels been brutally murdered on Christmas Day? She knew the answer. Their father had killed them. Despite his severe injuries, the man immediately became the main suspect. Sarah insisted that he posed a great danger to himself and others. Considering his condition and the nature of his wounds, the police believed they could talk to him very soon. Under such circumstances, police officers obtained truthful confessions, so the investigators wanted to speak with Andrew while he was in the hospital. They hoped to find out as quickly as possible what had happened to the children and himself. The police assumed he had massacred defenseless children, and after realizing what he had done, decided to take his own life. The children's bodies were so mutilated that the cause of death and all injuries could only be determined on the forensic table. Probably the older daughter was killed first, then the younger. Chloe was struck very hard on the head with a baseball bat, and her skull was fractured. Subsequently, the little girl was stabbed 26 times, similar to the injuries her father had suffered. Some of these injuries had been inflicted on the child before her death. The rest were added posthumously. The cause of death appears to be blood loss. Aubrey's condition was even worse. Her body showed 32 stab wounds that caused fatal bleeding. The medical examiner determined that the attacker had turned the children over at least twice to stab them from the front and back. Apparently, he was furious and wanted to ensure the girls wouldn't survive this Christmas. At the same time, forensic officers examined the victim's apartment. They found blood-soaked men's jeans and a t-shirt that belonged to Andrew. They also found a knife that was apparently the murder weapon. There was so much blood in the apartment that a special unit had to be involved in the investigation. The experts found numerous smear marks from the knife, fingerprints, and socks with a characteristic pattern. Even in the refrigerator, blood traces were found, indicating that the perpetrator had rummaged through it after the massacre. In one of the rooms, a note was found addressed to Andrew's sister. In it, he wrote a long list of frustrations with Sarah. In his opinion, he had been misunderstood by the woman he was truly in love with. He felt betrayed and also pointed to the many hardships he had experienced during his marriage and after the divorce. According to Andrew's confession, he was only happy with his children, and so he decided to leave this world with his daughters. Apparently, it was a suicide note. After examining the crime scene, the officers concluded that Andrew was the one who had attacked and brutally killed his children. The man then went into the bathroom and inflicted wounds on himself that he believed would be fatal. According to the doctors, however, none of these wounds were actually fatal. So he survived. Andrew recovered quickly and was monitored by doctors and the police until his release. Here, he admitted that he had inflicted the injuries on himself. This was heard by several nurses. Immediately after his treatment, he was arrested on charges of double murder. When Andrew was brought to the station, Sarah and her parents were already there. The police stated they were certain that the children had been massacred by their own father. All the evidence, the note, and the husband's confession pointed to it. The mother of the girls became hysterical and wept and had to be taken away from the station. The state of despair and grief of the woman is hard to imagine, for Sarah had tried everything to keep the girls away from their father. The woman had filed complaints with the Child Protection Agency and the court, but no evidence of the man's dangerousness was found, and she was not believed, and now her girls had been killed by their father's hand. The case became a highly publicized affair. Like-minded people held many memorial events to honor the memory of the innocent girls who were tormented by their own father. The public was outraged and supported Sarah. The events led to worldwide reviews of the child protection system. Even the judge who deemed Andrew suitable for fatherhood was affected. It was his decision that gave the unfit man free access to the girls and cost them their lives. However, no actions were ever taken against the judge or the Youth Welfare Office. The bodies of the victims of the senseless massacre were cremated. During the investigations, details of the complex relationship between Andrew and Sarah were uncovered. Particularly serious problems plagued the man on the financial front. In May 2017, he quit his job. Even before that, he had fallen behind on his rent and utility payments, so the utility company simply turned off his electricity. The main reason for these financial difficulties was the young father's penchant for gambling. He earned good money in his job, about $80 per shift. But during this time, he became addicted to card games. He often lost but never gave up and spent every penny to win again. However, it only got worse, and after losing, he began borrowing money from anyone who would give it to him. His addiction spiraled out of control, and Andrew began spending about $3,000 per month on gambling. As early as fall 2015, he won a large sum of $100,000 in bets. However, when he got into a frenzy trying to increase the winnings, he almost immediately lost the entire amount. To get the winnings back, the man borrowed $25,000 from a man named Paul, but he was in no hurry to repay the money because he didn't have it and continued to borrow money. In the process, he lost interest in his work and eventually quit in spring 2017. He owed about $25,000. This led to serious financial difficulties, as all credit limits were exhausted. Andrew even thought about cashing out his savings from a pension fund. The man had sunk so low that he could no longer afford groceries and asked his neighbors for food to feed his daughters while the girls were visiting him. His whole life spiraled downward and ended in a terrible tragedy. During the investigations, the police found some alarming searches in his browser history. About a month before the double murder and attempted suicide, he began actively searching the internet for the most effective method to kill himself. The situation was further exacerbated by a custody dispute. Andrew was under pressure from all sides. His problems came to a head at Christmas. That was when he made his final, horrific decision. Particularly cruel was the way he ultimately chose to commit the murder. He killed his daughters with such cold-bloodedness and brutality that serious doubts arose about whether he had ever loved them. On January 16th, the trial against the double murderer began. The prosecutor described in detail to the jury the relationship and life situation in which Andrew found himself shortly before the crime. The prosecution assumed, however, that he had voluntarily gotten himself into this situation because he was unable to overcome his addictions. His actions were clearly planned and deliberate, as everything, including his browser history, proves. The lawyer relied on an apparent inconsistency in the investigator's work. He claimed the patrol officer had left the apartment while waiting for backup, but what happened in the apartment during that time was unknown. According to him, Andrew and his children were victims of a murderer who had come to settle the man's debts. At the moment the police officer left the apartment, the real perpetrator could have escaped via the fire escape. That sounded absurd, and the prosecution dismissed the allegations. The apartment had been monitored the entire time. No signs of forced entry were found, and it was impossible for the perpetrator to sneak past the officer unnoticed from the apartment. Moreover, these claims didn't match Andrew's confession made in the hospital. In the hospital, he asked the paramedics to finish him off, meaning he had injured himself. His note indicated that he wanted to take his own life and kill the girls to keep them with him after his death. The lawyer, however, insisted that the family could have fallen victim to an outsider, a murderer who also wanted to get rid of the children he hadn't expected to find in the apartment, or they were all random victims of a madman. The fact is that on April 25, 2017, a woman was assaulted not far from Andrew's house. She was also stabbed, but the police couldn't find the attacker. The defense believed that both crimes could have been committed by the same man who was still at large. But the nature of the wounds and all the circumstances were different, and everything pointed to the defendant's guilt. As the court began to describe the crime scene in detail and present the evidence, Andrew cried. The prosecutor was convinced that the massacre of the children had been committed by their own father. Evidence included bloody sock prints on the floor. If the attacker had been an outsider, he would have worn shoes, because one only wears socks in a domestic environment. They could confirm that the fabric pattern of the socks imprinted on the blood was identical to those Andrew wore on the day of his arrest. The medical examiner also emphasized that the wounds of the man and the children were identical. Andrew admitted to wounding himself, and the children had similar cuts, meaning they were inflicted by the same person and with the same weapon. In the trial, the defense attorney didn't relent and accused Sarah of exerting moral pressure on the man, which could have triggered his aggression. The attorney tried to prove that she had significantly contributed to destabilizing his mental state. The grieving mother defended herself against these accusations, stating that the ex-husband had been aggressive for a long time, which was the reason for the divorce. She had only tried to protect the children and shield them from a dangerous, unpredictable father. That's why she had filed complaints with all authorities, but they were all ignored. Sarah had at least tried to ensure the safety of such meetings. She worried about the girls. Nevertheless, Andrew had changed a lot lately. His condition seemed to have improved, but no one realized it was all just a show. The defense attorney continued to defend the man's innocence by portraying him as a victim of circumstances. He referred to a man named Paul, to whom the protagonist owed $25,000. According to Andrew, he couldn't pay his debts and therefore had to store a suspicious bag in the apartment, the contents of which he wasn't supposed to know. At regular intervals, various people who looked like criminals picked up the bag, and they had a spare key that Andrew had provided. One of them, according to the defense, had committed the massacre in the apartment. Then the prosecution had questions for Andrew. How could he bring children into the house if criminals were constantly present there? He himself had thus created an unfavorable, dangerous environment and put the children in danger. In the trial, Andrew provided a new version of events. According to him, he spent Christmas morning with the children. They went to a local store and then played outside. After returning home, the father wanted to have a festive lunch. Suddenly, he was stabbed in the neck. According to the man, he lost consciousness from this blow, and when he came to, he found the children lifeless. The intruder was still in the apartment, but Andrew couldn't see his face because the lights were off. However, he clearly recognized that it was a dark-skinned man with dark hair. The perpetrator rushed into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, whereupon a fight ensued. Thus, Andrew received several more blows and lost consciousness again. However, during the search, neither the mysterious bag nor traces of the unknown person were found, neither DNA nor fingerprints. The prosecution was convinced that the main motive for the murder was Andrew's financial problems. He was disillusioned with life, couldn't pay his debts, couldn't provide child support for his children, and decided to kill his children to free himself from this predicament. The jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Andrew guilty of second-degree double murder. The child murderer was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 22 years. Andrew showed no emotion when the verdict was announced. The family of the murdered girls was astonished at the leniency of the sentence, but could never appeal the verdict. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
From 2007 to 2009, in Japan, middle-aged single men died in mysterious ways. Initially, the police did not prioritize these cases, but in one instance, the secret of the girl referred to by the media as the Black Widow was uncovered. Kanikijima was born on November 27, 1944, in Nakoshitsu, Japan. She was the eldest of 4 siblings. While the names of her relatives were not published, it is known that her father was a notary and her mother a piano teacher. Coming from wealthy families, Kanai's parents tried to provide their children with favorable conditions and everything they needed as adults. As the firstborn, Kanai received special attention and was inspired by her mother's musical passion to develop her piano-playing skills. She spent endless hours refining her technique, and quickly her talents became apparent, performing solo concerts on various stages and participating in prestigious competitions. However, cooking was not Kanai's only interest. Already at the age of 9, her mother noted this skill as a good sign for her future ability to raise a worthy generation. Her father enforced strict discipline at home, including restricting access to certain resources, which Kanai found unbearable and soon gave in to her instincts. In high school, she learned her father had $21,000 in cash at home, which she took and spent on clothes and designer handbags. When her father learned of this, he punished Kanai by cutting her allowance. But contrary to his wishes, she did not regret her actions and instead longed for even more money. This led her back into the fascinating world of dating, where she began offering her companionship to older men for generous financial rewards. In this context, she entered into a relationship with a man in his 40s, whose identity remains unknown. Under his influence, Kanai stole a classmate's bank card, and together they withdrew about $80,000. When authorities discovered them, they were arrested and brought to trial. However, since Kanai was still a minor, she received a probation sentence. Nevertheless, she maintained excellent academic performance and graduated from high school. Afterwards, she decided to move to Tokyo and enroll in the Faculty of Economics. However, Kanai almost immediately lost interest in her studies and dropped out of college. Nevertheless, the city enchanted her, and she did not want to leave. To make ends meet, Kanai took on several temporary and unstable jobs, one of which was as a waitress in a fast food restaurant. Long working hours, difficult conditions, and low wages did not allow her to rest. She constantly worried about how to pay the rent for the apartment she hated because it was very modest. It was only a matter of time before Kanai adopted a new reprehensible habit. She entered stores and stole cosmetics, books, and even money by pretending to be an ordinary customer. Although she was caught several times, she managed to avoid arrest. These random thefts were not enough to sustain the lifestyle she aspired to, so Kanai quit her job and decided to go to an escort club. These establishments offered services ranging from conversations and social gatherings to more intimate interactions. Clients had the opportunity to choose a woman based on the information provided. However, at a height of 1.5 meters and weighing 105 kilograms, Kanai did not meet generally accepted beauty standards, so she initially did not attract much attention. But everything changed when she met the pimp Takuchi, who became her mentor. He taught her how to satisfy a man, inspired her to develop a complete marketing strategy, and advised her to look for middle-aged or older men with low self-esteem who were not inclined to desire the women they really wanted. Kanai recognized the value of her own abilities and strengths and began to develop emotional relationships with her partners. She discovered that kindness and attention not only attracted attention, but also appreciation. Kanai became an expert in the art of seduction, capable of reading people and understanding what they wanted. She discovered a new, unprecedented strength in herself. At that time, Kanai adopted the pseudonym Sakura and invented the story that her father was a professor at the prestigious University of Tokyo, the most elite educational institution in the country. On other occasions, she introduced herself as a nurse, therapist, or famous chef. All these fictional stories created a captivating image. One of the clients who fell into this new role was Sadao Fukuyama. They met in February 2001 in a bar, and their communication was so intense that they became a couple within 2 weeks. But not only that, the man, who had previously distinguished himself by frugality and precision in spending, made the mistake of trusting her, which Kanai shamelessly exploited. First, she invented a story about the death of her parents in a plane crash, and said that she could not pay the tuition fees at the music school in Boston, where she allegedly studied. Sadao promised to cover all costs, and in return, she would come to visit him once a month from the USA. The man looked forward to these visits, elegantly dressed and deeply in love with the woman he considered his bride, while Kanai used the opportunity to deplete most of his savings. After a few years, Kanai ended the relationship when she realized that she had exhausted all of Sadao's financial resources. She was cunning and manipulative, leaving no traces that could lead to her discovery. When Sadao suspected he had been deceived and tried to report her, the evidence was not sufficient to file a lawsuit. A few months later, in August 2007, Sadao came home late from work. Worried, one of his colleagues went to his house and found him dead in the shower. When the news became known, Kanai transferred $50,000 from her ex-fiancé's funds to her bank account. Since the police could not determine the cause of death, the case was classified as a domestic accident. In 2008, Kanai became interested in the development of the internet in Japan. After analyzing the obvious advantages of the virtual world, she decided to change her strategy. Under the pseudonym Sakura, she created a profile on major local social networks dedicated to dating. In her description, she made it clear that she was seeking a serious relationship to start a family. Kanai perfectly understood the characteristics and needs of her potential victims. She knew they were mostly men with high work and social stress, high income, and a void in their souls. Moreover, her strategy was to adapt to the situation and change according to the preferences of her interlocutors. In this sense, Kanai sometimes appeared as a young woman seeking true love, a talented pianist, or even as a pet store owner with a passion for cooking. It didn't take long for her to become a virtual celebrity. Her profile mainly attracted mature and older men who wanted to add some dignity to their age. One of those who fell in love with Kanai was Takao Terada, a 53-year-old systems engineer who lived in a suburb of Tokyo. Since his daily routine consisted of commuting from work to home, the only people he had contact with were his mother and his sister. In February 2008, Takao decided to meet someone online. 2 months later, Kanai sent him an invitation for a meeting, expressing her hope for a future marriage. But first, she asked for financial help to cover some expenses. At the same time, Kanai posed as a nurse and caregiver, responding to ads posted by Kenzo, an 80-year-old man living in Noda City in Chiba Prefecture. Despite his low income, Kenzo came from a distinguished family. His father was a famous artist from whom he had inherited valuable paintings. Additionally, Kenzo suffered from several health issues. During their first conversation, Kanai sent him a carefully retouched photo where part of her body was barely visible. Kenzo was impressed and hired her as a nurse and cook. Not only did Kanai prepare a special dish for him, but she was also ready to do anything to please him. In this way, she gained his devotion and gratitude. A month later, Kanai asked Ken for a loan, saying the money was needed to finance her university studies. Without hesitation, he gave her all his savings. Meanwhile, Kanai manipulated Takao's feelings, who unreservedly told his mother about the exceptional treatment he was receiving from his bride-to-be and his plans to marry. Kenzo was so filled with trust in Kanai that he gave her a copy of his house keys. However, the man soon fell into a coma and had to be hospitalized. In his absence, Kanai entered and left his house, taking his paintings, which she then sold at high prices. Additionally, she simultaneously deceived other men, whose names were not disclosed in all cases, but it is known that their ages ranged between 40 and 50. While Takao dreamed of living together, Kanai already had a plan that was entirely different. After buying electric stoves online, she agreed to meet him at her house and brought sleeping pills with her. After preparing dinner for both, she crushed some pills and mixed them into the food. A few minutes later, Takao lost consciousness. Kanai dragged him into the room, closed all doors and windows, set up the stove, laid charcoal on it, and turned it on before leaving. She then transferred $121,000 from Takao's account to her own bank account, also taking the house keys and the computer. Days later, on February 4, 2009, Takao's boss came to his house to check if everything was all right. Receiving no response, he contacted local authorities, and Takao's lifeless body was discovered. After analyzing his call history, investigators found that his contact list contained only his mother, his sister, and Kanai under the pseudonym Sakura. When officers contacted Kanai, she reported that Takao was emotionally unstable and probably died after suffering the distress of her rejecting his marriage proposal. Given the absence of signs of violence, this version seemed plausible to the police, and the investigations were therefore not pursued further. After he awoke from the coma, Kenzo returned home. On the evening of May 15, 2009, Kanai visited him as usual. She sat with him and began preparing dinner, but this time added a special ingredient to his dishes: tranquilizers. As soon as Kenzo fell asleep, she locked him in the room and repeated the procedure with the plates, as she had done with her other victims. Before leaving, she accessed Kenzo's bank account and transferred $13,000 to her own. However, this time one of the electric stoves caught fire, and the flames engulfed the entire house. Kenzo died instantly from fatal burns. A subsequent autopsy revealed that the man had consumed an unusually large number of sleeping pills, although it also turned out that he had never previously taken such medications. The authorities recognized his death as an accident. Meanwhile, Kanai continued to block and search online for more victims. In July 2009, Isayuki Yude stumbled upon her account and sent her a message. Unable to resist her charm, Isayuki, a 41-year-old single man, in addition to his salary, received income from renting family properties. Moreover, he was very close to his mother, who lived in Fujima. During their first conversation, Kanai introduced herself as Dr. Randine, seeking a man who could financially support her and whom she could marry. Isayuki was fascinated by her words and invited the girl to a meeting in 2 days. Over the days, Kanai made it clear to Isayuki that their relationship was getting stronger. They announced their engagement and began making wedding plans. Then, she persuaded him to transfer $30,000 under the marriage contract to finance her studies. August 5, 2009, was marked as a special date in the couple's calendar. For this occasion, they planned a trip to Fujima, where they intended to relax for 3 days. At the same time, the main reason for Isayuki's excitement was the meeting of the two most important women in his life, his mother and Kanai. He was so excited that he wanted to share his happiness on his own blog and even announced his upcoming wedding. To honor the holiday, Kanai prepared a lavish dinner, and unbeknownst to Isayuki, she crushed various substances and sprinkled them into his food. At the end of the evening, they drove a rental car to their destination. Upon arriving in Fujimi City, the couple parked in the parking lot. At that moment, the pills took effect on Isayuki, and he fell into a deep sleep. Then Kanai turned on the electric stove, ignited the charcoal, and left the man locked in the car. Everything was as usual, but this time she made a mistake. Kanai forgot to leave her keys in the car. At that point, the only surveillance camera recorded her leaving the parking lot. Kanai then stole $35,000 from Isayuki's account. When the police discovered the body, they initially assumed that the man had died by himself. However, when it turned out that the car keys were nowhere to be found, this caused confusion. Almost immediately, this feeling turned into suspicion, since no note was found that could justify Isayuki's actions. Moreover, there were no traces of charcoal on his hands or clothes. According to Isayuki's mother, her son had no reason to make such a drastic decision. In fact, he was more than satisfied with what life had to offer. The investigators, after studying his blog, confirmed this. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning, but also uncovered another detail: traces of tranquilizers in his body. In summary, the police concluded that, along with Isayuki, 3 bachelors had died under similar circumstances that year, raising concerns and suspicions. When the police gained access to the recordings, Kanai was released, but the lack of additional cameras did not allow for the discovery of crucial evidence. However, from that moment on, all investigations focused on her. When Isayuki's computer was analyzed, it was revealed how they had met. When the investigators approached Kanai, she stated that she had met Isayuki the day before and had left him alone. She also suggested that the man might have done something to end his life after her departure. Despite Kanai's statement, the police decided to initiate a thorough investigation and gather information on all deaths and fraud cases related to her. On September 15, 2009, Kanai came into contact again on a virtual platform with another 43-year-old man, whose name remains unknown. In this case, the girl posed as an American student studying culinary arts in Japan. She also led me to believe that she was facing family troubles and financial difficulties funding her studies. Finally, Kanai told him that she was ready to give up everything, including her studies, to be with him. The next day, her lover transferred $17,000 to her, and a few days later, Kanai moved into his house. At the same time, she purchased 2 electric stoves and then proceeded to cut all the fire alarm cables in the house. Kanai's plan was foiled when on September 23, 2009, the groom's sister came to stay at the residence for a few days. The sister immediately became suspicious of her new sister-in-law and tried to convince her brother not to continue the relationship. It got even worse when he told her about the strange circumstances of their acquaintance and the money he had lent to Kanai. Then, the sister decided to follow her intuition and told the police everything she knew. On September 25th, the police arrived at the residence and arrested Kanai on fraud charges. When they searched the room, they discovered that all the alarm devices were turned off, indicating that the girl was about to carry out a typical procedure. During the search, various medications were found, including several classes of drugs that cause drowsiness and sedation. Moreover, the investigators found all her online purchases of cooking appliances on her computer. These pieces of evidence established a direct connection to earlier cases, thus making her the prime suspect in Isayuki's death. In January 2010, as the investigation into the unusual deaths continued, Kanai was charged with multiple counts of fraud. A month later, she was also charged with murder, specifically for Takao's death, although an autopsy had never been conducted in this case. The charges were based on the absence of clear evidence of the cause of death, which led to an unusual situation during the trial. She declared her innocence and claimed that the deaths of these men were accidents or personal decisions by the men themselves, which matched her defense strategy aiming for an acquittal due to a lack of concrete evidence. In the absence of such direct evidence and lacking witnesses or confessions, the prosecution emphasized the significance of circumstantial evidence such as her presence with the victims before their deaths, the similarity of the causes of death, and the fact that all tests continued showed that the men had consumed a drug also found on Kanai. The prosecution also stated that the girl had received large loans from 3 of her victims and had killed them to avoid repaying the money. Prosecutors argued that Kanai had poisoned the 3 victims with charcoal and electric stoves to confuse the authorities, as death by poisoning is a common method of murder in Japan. Finally, on April 13, 2012, a jury found Kanai guilty of murdering 3 men, and the court subsequently sentenced her to death. Kanai was on death row and continued to write in her blog, discussing her experiences, and the fame she gained even brought her financial support from some fans who were willing to improve her living conditions. Incredibly, one of the fans who financially supported her eventually married Kanai. This happened in 2016, and according to available data, the man was about 60 years old. After an accident, however, he became disabled, which made further financial support impossible, and then Kanai divorced him. Kanai also used her time behind bars to write memoirs, which were then published weekly in a women's magazine. At the same time, she published an autobiographical novel titled Praise. 100 days after the divorce, Kanai remarried, this time to a real estate company. But after a few months, they divorced in 2018. Kanai decided to marry again. This time, the chosen one was a 40-year-old man who worked at the publishing house responsible for publishing her book. As she awaited her execution, Kanai continued to lead an active, controversial life that drew both admiration and condemnation.
Usually crimes are committed quietly and discreetly to hide the atrocities from the public eye. However, some murderers don't seem to care about that. Today's story is about a truly sensational case that caused a great stir throughout the entire city. Kimberly Domenwinger was born on September 25, 1963, in the small town of Bloomington, Illinois, USA. Cam lived in a large family with 3 other siblings. Later, the relationship between her parents deteriorated, and eventually, the family broke apart, leaving the mother alone with the children. Cam was naturally a beautiful, athletic, and very active girl. In school, she became a cheerleader and was very popular. She regularly attended cheerleader camps and was well liked by both teachers and students. She had no problems with friends and acquaintances. Cam proved to be very sociable. Due to her beauty, the girl wanted to become an actress. Unfortunately, this story is not about the professional successes of the young beauty, but she did achieve a small success in this area. Cam was part of the cast of the famous film Grandview. The work on it took place in '83 in the city of Pontiac, Illinois. Cam decided to try her luck, and everything worked out. Later, this was one of the happiest moments in Cam's life. At the same time, Kimberly's mother became the owner of a bar. She had long dreamed of opening her own business and used her grandmother's inheritance to buy a place. The daughter got a job with her mother. She thought she could become part of the family business, but unfortunately, these hopes were in vain. Cam and her mother didn't agree, and so she was forced to leave the house. Sometime after, in '85, Cam met a young man named Todd Wonger, and they began dating. The relationship seemed perfect from the start. The woman found a loving and kind young man. Soon, Cam became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter named Kelsey. Then the couple married. After the wedding, the husband changed and became increasingly cruel. With the birth of the child, they ran into financial difficulties, and the situation worsened. Kim managed to handle childcare and housework, but the money wasn't enough. Therefore, she wanted to take on part-time employment, but there were problems with that, and she couldn't find suitable work. The situation at home escalated, and gradually Kimberly concluded that Todd should be separated from her. The beautiful Cam did not go unnoticed by men. Immediately after the divorce, she began dating another man. It was Dale Fostick, but this relationship didn't work out. The new lover admitted that he decided to break up with the young woman as soon as he found out that she was expecting his child. Dale wasn't ready for children and decided simply to disappear. Cam was hit hard by the news because she was sure she wanted to start a family with him. Her friends said that even after the end of their relationship, Cam still felt drawn to Dale. She was worried about the 2 relationships that didn't work out. Against this background, Kimberly seriously considered terminating the pregnancy. After a short deliberation, however, she decided to keep the baby. Thus, Cam's second child was born, a son named Logan. Despite the separation from Dale, the biological father later came forward and declared himself willing to care for his son and pay a small amount of support from his salary. But even with this plan, she couldn't rely on him. Dale often delayed payments. They were inconsistent, and it was clearly not enough to live in peace and raise children. Therefore, the young mother had to work while her friends took care of the children. At this time, Cam worked as a hairdresser. Additionally, she found extra income by working as a nanny and cleaning lady. This stabilized the young family a bit, but she still lived on food stamps and was quite poor. Cam had a difficult relationship with her mother, as the family did not support her. When her son was still very young, Cam met an aspiring pastor named Kurt Simon. As he admitted, both were very poor and barely got by. Nevertheless, the couple developed strong feelings, were happy, and supported each other despite the difficult phase of life. The two were determined to achieve stability and overcome all problems. Kurt was so in love with his partner that he planned to adopt her children. Logan even started calling him Daddy. They seemed to be the perfect couple. They were fun-loving young people who had no idea of the threat looming over them. Around 10:30 p.m. on a Saturday evening of May 22nd, 1993, the two returned home from a small trip. They had traveled to Iowa, where Kurt's parents lived, so his family could get to know Cam and give their blessing for the wedding. This also happened in connection with attending the theological seminar at the university. The couple took the opportunity and decided, just one day before returning to Illinois, to hold an engagement party, gathering friends and family to share this special day with them. The relationship between the two young lovers grew quickly. They seemed to be the perfect couple, and close friends reacted enthusiastically to this decision. Such an important event brightened this trip. Cam and Kurt returned in good spirits and were ready to spend the weekend together. The next day, the couple planned to attend a concert by Camberly's daughter Kelsey. The girl attended a music school and seemed to be a real young talent. Her parents supported her in every way and were eager to attend the event and then support the girl by gathering the whole family in a pizzeria. The lovers drove the family car into the driveway of the house. First, Kurt got out and brought part of his luggage into the house. When he stepped out to get the rest, Cam was already outside and was about to enter. She smiled at her future husband and said that it was a bit warmer here than in Iowa. That was the last sentence she said before she opened the front door of the house. The young woman stepped in, followed by a massive explosion that blew Kurt back with a shockwave. The explosion was so strong that it woke all the neighbors and shattered several windows in the surrounding houses. Kurt was stunned but still immediately ran after Cam and began searching for his beloved. He called her name, but the bride didn't respond. The young man ran inside the destroyed house and found Camberly lifeless on the floor. The right side of her skull was missing. It had been blown off by the explosion or shrapnel. In any case, there was no way to help the young mother. Kurt was in shock. He couldn't believe what had happened. It was only thanks to a lucky coincidence that the children weren't with them. They had stayed with Cam's family during the trip. The victim's fiancé immediately dialed emergency services and stayed with her until the police officers arrived. The police officers quickly responded to the emergency call. At the crime scene, they found Kurt dissolved in tears. He was kneeling amidst the ruins of the house, holding his beloved's head in his arms. She was only 29 years old at the time of her death. The event shocked the entire community because it seemed strange and untypical for such peaceful places. People were afraid that their houses might also be booby-trapped and could explode and asked the police for protection. Fortunately, nothing of the sort was found, and the residents could continue their lives in peace. Explosives experts were on site. They quickly found out that there was a bag of explosives in the family's hallway, activated by a button. The button was jammed and would only trigger if the object was disturbed. Cam entered the house and immediately noticed the unfamiliar object. Out of curiosity, she decided to see what the package was, and it exploded in her hands at face height. Cam was dead on the spot. During the examination of the site, the medical examiners found numerous components for bomb making. They found wires and detonators in the basement, packaging of batteries, and discarded rubber gloves in a trash can. Since the explosion had occurred in Kurt's presence, but the young man had only suffered minor injuries, the police initially considered him the main suspect. In front of the neighbors, the shocked and grieving man was handcuffed, read his rights, and taken to the station for questioning. There he was held for several hours. Kurt immediately cooperated with the investigators. He provided all requested information, including fingerprints and DNA material, and detailed the events that led to the tragic incident. A few hours later, Kurt was released. He bore no grudge against the police officers who were just doing their job. His active involvement in the investigation gave him hope that the perpetrator would soon be found. Since the future husband was not involved in the incident, the tools and parts for building the bomb were brought into the house by the perpetrator. The front door and windows had not been broken into, at least according to the condition of the components found after the explosion. Everything had been destroyed by the shockwave, but the intruder had entered the house without vandalism. allowing him to gain access. Therefore, the police officers were certain that it was a targeted act of revenge against Cam. Obviously, the intruder decided to assemble an explosive device at the crime scene, probably to prevent it from accidentally exploding during transport. It was a strong charge that would have completely destroyed the house and killed the entire family. The perpetrator thought he could kill two birds with one stone, get rid of his target and destroy all evidence linking him to the incident. Luckily for the police, the explosive charge did not detonate fully, so the destruction was weaker than the perpetrator had expected, and some evidence could be secured. This allowed the investigators to obtain further valuable information. After the first main suspect had provided an alibi and was ruled out as a possible murderer, the investigators naturally wondered who wanted Cam and her family so dead that he would destroy them in a massive explosion with no chance of survival. Kurt told the investigators about Cam's mother named Cricket Lewis. At that time, she was already married to another man and had changed her last name. Kurt considered her the true embodiment of evil. She was, according to the young man, the only person in the deceased's environment capable of such a terrible deed. Camberly and Cricket had a very bad relationship with each other. These statements later became the reason for the great hatred the woman felt. She felt outrageously slandered. According to Kurt, the bride's mother was the owner of her bar and focused only on that. Nothing else in life interested her. Moreover, she was a very violent person. The woman showed inexplicable anger without apparent reason, seemingly against all people. Her relationship with the victim was tense, and according to several people from the victim's environment, Cricket had been exploiting Cam the whole time. Mother and daughter indeed had a very complicated relationship and saw each other only once or twice a year. For Cricket, it was all about money and power. She made sure her daughter worked in her bar, earning in rather dubious ways. The woman received an inheritance from her grandmother, who suddenly died. Despite her age, doctors believed she was healthy, yet she died under quite strange circumstances. Cricket then received an inheritance, which she used to buy her bar. The incident was also investigated, but no evidence was found linking the suspicious woman to the dead old lady. It was eventually dismissed as an age and health problem. After Cam had taken a job in the bar, Cricket began exploiting her. She constantly underpaid her, even punished her under flimsy reasons to withhold part of her salary or bonus, just like with other employees. Cam did her best and tried to keep the job, hoping to solve her financial problems with the support of a family member, but instead, she only got problems. Eventually, Cam realized what was going on, cast aside her illusions, and left the bar. The suspicion hardened already during the funeral of the deceased. Those present who sincerely loved the young woman and mourned her noticed that Cricket was more worried about the loss of the insurance policy, which meant she couldn't receive financial compensation for her daughter's death. In the investigations, however, the police officers could never find evidence of the woman's violence and malicious intent. It turned out, however, that the victim's mother had fallen for tax fraud. She had underpaid taxes and hadn't filed a tax return, resulting in her business license being revoked. The investigators carefully checked the information and eyewitness accounts. Of course, the mother might have had easy access to her daughter's residence, but there seemed to be no motive for reprisals. Eventually, it was concluded that Cricket simply didn't possess the skills or technical means to build a bomb herself. Moreover, she had a solid alibi, which was verified as true. The investigations were back at the beginning. The next suspect was the ex-husband named Todd Wonger. According to the fiancé, he and Cam had a disagreement over custody of Kelsey. He was the right person to organize and execute the crime. He lived nearby, only 3 kilometers from the couple's house, and worked as an engineer in a company. This suggests that Todd certainly had the necessary skills and technical equipment to build an explosive device. Upon examining the circumstances of Cam and Todd's relationship, however, It was concluded that the two communicated normally and settled minor disagreements through simple dialogue. The man simply had no motive to kill Cam. Additionally, he had a solid alibi, which was also confirmed. The next suspect was Cam's colleague Phil Hartman, against whom she had previously filed a police report. Cam accused him of harassment, whereupon the colleague behaved aggressively and even threatened to take revenge on her. The man admitted that he had tried to enter into a relationship with the beauty, but she found him biased. The colleague was forced to abandon the endeavor. He also had a confirmed alibi, as he had lived far away from Bloomington in recent months and was not in the city at the time of the couple's return. The last on the list of suspects was Logan's father, Dale Fostick. The 31-year-old man lived in the east of the city, in a small house near Cam's house, and worked for Caterpillar. The suspect was an airplane model builder and built true-to-scale working models. Dale was skilled with machines. He could even rebuild a car engine and fit well into the role of the perpetrator. The investigators went to Dale's house with a search warrant. Dale did not object and allowed them to search the house. As it turned out, Dale had special tools for assembling the device, along with Cam's obituary placed on the kitchen table, which looked extremely suspicious. The investigators also found a very large stock of components that could be used to manufacture various explosive devices. Several tools were confiscated from him, the most interesting of which were wire cutters, which were immediately sent for examination. It turned out that the marks from this tool were very similar to those found on the bomb components in Cam's house. It was also found that Dale had receipts from the Walmart store where he had bought ammunition and other materials. The investigators found that these materials were very similar to those used to build the explosive device. After analyzing the explosive residues, the forensic experts found that these were the components used to manufacture the explosive device. The police had very few pieces of evidence from the beginning. Most evidence was destroyed by the explosion. To unmask the murderer, the forensic team had to examine all the found evidence under the microscope. Eventually, advanced techniques like gas chromatography and mass spectrometry were used to obtain direct evidence. One of the experts working with the bomb fragments immediately noticed the special design of the explosive device. 2 holes were drilled into one of the end caps, which could be seen as the perpetrator's signature. In the law enforcement database, there were about 20,000 entries on homemade bombs used in one way or another for murders and other crimes. Among them were only a few such constructions. This could indicate that the murderer used special literature or knowledge not generally available, as well as a high level of technical knowledge and skill and long preparation. The attacker didn't just build the first construction he came across, but analyzed several variants and chose the best for his purposes. Forensic experts examined the remaining fragments of the device step by step. They found traces of tools. At this point, the police already knew that most people on the suspect list were not involved in the massacre, and all efforts were focused on proving Dale Fostick's guilt, in whose house the suspicious items were found. They were stored in a workshop in the basement. The young man was single and lived in his small house on the outskirts of Bloomington. When he realized that his ex-girlfriend was engaged to another man, he might have felt jealousy and wanted to take revenge. This made him one of the few people in the victim's environment who had a real motive for the deed. Besides the design, the forensic team discovered other features. In particular, the perpetrator used 2 different types of gunpowder, which had a greater effect in combination. As it turned out, the mixture could have been significantly less dangerous, but it was these 2 types of gunpowder that amplified the power of the explosion. The effect was so devastating that much of Cam's house was destroyed. This peculiarity could, of course, not be known to an ordinary layperson, which also speaks for the involvement of a trained person in the murder. One of the controversial points of the case was the many testimonies in defense of the accused. Many acquaintances in his environment truly believed that a meek and quiet man like Dale could not have done such a thing. Generally, good people don't come up with such ideas. The police searched for clues of a tendency toward violence or aggression in Dale's life. Before this bloody incident, he was not involved in any violent incidents. He had not come into conflict with the law, had not been arrested for such allegations, and did not suffer from dependencies. According to dozens of people, Dale had even recently shown interest in his child and tried to build a relationship with Cam. Due to the components in the house, however, Dale became the main suspect in this crime. He was arrested for first-degree murder and placed in state prison until a hearing. The first trial was postponed due to insufficient evidence. During the hearing, a juror refused to participate in the proceedings, and another juror fell ill, so he could no longer belong to the panel. For this reason, a second hearing round was scheduled. The defense portrayed Dale in every conceivable way as a devoted father, a kind and modest man who is not capable of a cruel and sneaky crime. His role as a caring and loving father was used by the defense to convince the jurors of the defendant's innocence. According to Dale, when he found out about his girlfriend's pregnancy, he was initially against the baby and fatherhood because he was too young. When Cam decided to keep the boy, he turned away from her. Later, however, he recognized his mistake and completely changed his attitude. Therefore, he was willing to accept paternity. So the man decided to restore the relationship with his son and Cam and even hoped to marry her. Dale claimed that it made no sense in his case to kill the woman he loved and with whom he wanted to start a family. Even the mother of the massacre victim, Cricket, was on Dale's side. She was still convinced that Cam's fiancé was the murderer. The woman claimed that the aspiring Pastor Kurt had become violent recently and tried to control his beloved in everything. This led to numerous disagreements. However, everyone immediately saw the inconsistencies in her story, as Kim practically didn't communicate with her mother and couldn't know about the situation in her relationship. Cricket justified the accused in every conceivable way. She emphasized that Dale had recently shown signs of attention towards her and tried to gain Cam's trust. He began visiting her frequently to spend time with the child. Dale had changed very much for the better, repeatedly confessed his love to Cam, apologized for his earlier decision, and tried to win her favor. Although the young mother was unyielding and had a relationship with her new boyfriend, she didn't want to part with him. On the contrary, the couple had plans to marry and confirmed this through their engagement. The prosecution insisted that Cam's decision to keep the baby could have ended fatally. As soon as Dale found out that there was no way to save the relationship, he decided to take revenge. Kurt, whom he particularly hated, was probably the target. That explained the power of the bomb. The perpetrator acted with certainty. It was thus a miracle that the aspiring pastor survived. Cricket, however, insisted that Kurt could only survive the explosion for one reason. He had manufactured the explosive himself to kill Cam and was in no hurry to approach the house at the time of the explosion. A reconstruction of the events, however, showed that he entered the house first upon arrival and then went back to get his things before Cam entered the house. She took the package and triggered the explosion. In fact, Kurt was closest to death, but didn't know it and escaped miraculously. One of the victim's sisters also supported Dale. She appeared at the trial along with her mother and represented the woman's position that the accused was innocent. The prosecution, however, had an equally convincing argument. Explosives experts could find direct evidence that the explosive device was assembled by Dale, who had relatively high technical knowledge and the appropriate tools. Moreover, they found a large number of spare parts and materials in his house that could be used to manufacture similar devices. It could be proven that they were used to assemble the bomb that cost a young mother her life. It became known that Cam's relationship with Dale had significantly deteriorated after she met a new young man. When the young woman started dating Kurt, the ex showed his displeasure. From that moment on, he began actively interfering in her private life and tried to get closer to her. Love confessions and attempts to win back the ex-girlfriend began. However, Cam was no longer willing to restore the relationship for Dale. This aroused the anger of the accused, which was expressed by his colleagues. According to several men, Dale began saying more and more often shortly before the massacre that he would not support Cam financially. At the same time, he didn't hesitate to express himself and clearly tried to defame the victim's name. Dale was willing to quit his job instead of paying support. Cam, in turn, wanted to receive the child support she was entitled to from the negligent biological father of the boy and wanted to achieve justice through legal means. During this time, Dale began to worry that Cam would take his son away from him and that they would move to her fiancé, to then move to Iowa. To prevent this, Kurt moved into a house near Cam. Some colleagues stated that he behaved as if obsessed with her. Several colleagues of Dale told of his intention to obtain custody of Logan. This was necessary to avoid paying support. For this purpose, he collected evidence to defame Cam in every conceivable way. The child's father believed that in this way, he could strip the mother of parental rights and take his son for himself. Neighbors testified that they had seen Dale before the explosion in front of Cam's house. The victim kept a spare key under the doormat, so Dale had every opportunity to enter her house unhindered. Many described Dale as a meek, modest, even fearful man who simply wasn't capable of brutal murder. He was indeed non-confrontational, and many spoke extremely positively about him. Nevertheless, the prosecution believed that the murderer's character was decisive for the choice of his method to eliminate the victim. He simply didn't want to kill Cam with his own hands, and therefore used an explosive device to deliver a surprise attack. On February 26, 1996, the jury found Dale Fostick guilty of first-degree murder. The mother of the murdered woman said after the verdict that she did not agree with the judgment and Dale could contact her at any time if he needed help. The woman held his hand with tears in her eyes, kissed him on the cheek, and considered him a victim of a miscarriage of justice. By the way, he had 25 supporters who actively tried to defend the man's innocence in court. Only one of the jurors voted against the death penalty, and that was enough to avoid the death penalty. Therefore, the murderer received a 55-year prison sentence. Cricket Lewis, the mother of the deceased, continued to advocate for Dale Fostick's innocence. In May 1996, she wrote a letter to the local media confirming that she had financially supported Dale's lawyers. She also noted that her stance had caused great outrage in public. She had been repeatedly criticized for her support of the convicted man. The woman was also annoyed that her daughter's fiancé had labeled her in interviews with reporters as the embodiment of evil. She claimed she mourned her daughter every day and was aware that the true murderer was still at large. In fact, many believe that Cricket wasn't aiming to protect Dale, but to have a better chance at custody of Logan if Dale remained free. She wanted the opportunity to see the child. Cricket died at the age of 65 on December 19, 2003. Her unmarried son-in-law, Kurt Simon, succeeded and became pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Vandalia, Illinois. He has a wife, and from the marriage came 2 daughters, but after the death of his beloved, he never had custody of her children. Cam Winger's children were also successful and had good careers. Immediately after their mother's death, Kelsey moved in with her father, Todd Wonger. Later, she became a supervisor with the Salvation Army and worked in homeless shelters. Her father, Todd, died at the age of 52 on November 27, 2003. Logan was raised by Beverly and Sylvester Fostick, the parents of the biological father. Dale was imprisoned and died a natural death at the age of 48. This happened in 2010. According to the coroner's report, he died of a sudden illness. Logan graduated, joined the Bloomington Police Department, started a family, and has a child. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
Some cases from crime reports are so shocking that one loses faith in humanity. Today, we will talk about one of the most terrifying duos that operated in Australia, people who may have hidden dozens of victims who remain in the archives of unsolved cases. Cian Kingi was born on December 16, 1974, in New Zealand. Her family later moved to Australia, where they lived in the small Australian town of Nunga, which has a population of about 5,000. This town is located on the coast in a paradisiacal, warm place. From a young age, Cian was sweet and kind, loved sports and dancing, particularly ballet and netball. By nature, she was modest, but she could charm everyone she met, which made her very popular among her peers. She was beautiful, tall, had long blonde hair, and extraordinary eyes. The student definitely stood out with her appearance. Unfortunately, it was exactly that which became her downfall. Friday, November 27, 1987, was a typical weekday. Cian had just finished her lessons. It was a beautiful sunny day. Normally, the weather here at this time is perfect, with hot sun and cool wind, making it ideal for the locals to relax on the beach. At the store, Linda Kingi was shopping. The woman wanted to buy groceries and fabric to sew her daughter a nice dress for her upcoming birthday. The parents wanted to hold a party for the occasion and were actively preparing for the event. After school, Cian got on her yellow bicycle, knowing that she had to help choose the fabric. Her mother wanted to buy exactly what her daughter would like, so the student went straight to the store after school. Mother and daughter chose the fabric for the dress, as they only had time in the afternoon. Immediately after the shopping, Linda wanted to stop by the bakery to buy pastries for dinner. Cian was already very tired and wanted to go home. She found choosing fabrics very tiring, but she asked to be allowed to go home so that she could meet up with her mother later. Linda gave her permission to go, and so the student set off on her favorite short route. She had traveled this route hundreds of times, but today she wasn't as confident as usual. In the 80s, Nunga was a quiet provincial town. People here knew each other well, and so the town was considered one of the safest in the area. The Kingi family's house was only a few kilometers from the store and was reachable by bicycle in just a few minutes. Linda was confident that her 12-year-old daughter was safe because nothing bad had ever happened in their quiet town. Her mother even wanted to follow her right after the shopping, which shouldn't have taken long. At 4:45 p.m., Cian got on her bike and rode off. The path led the student through the park to the house. Linda went the other way after buying some pastries and drove directly to the house, albeit in the other direction by car. Since the student was not moving too quickly, the difference between the two was only a few minutes. Presumably, the woman arrived at the house just a few minutes after her daughter arrived on her bicycle. When Linda returned, she found the yellow bicycle in front of the house, but the student was not at home. Initially, this didn't alarm the woman, as the girl might have met a friend along the way or gone to visit a friend. It was the weekend after a long school week, and the teenagers often met up after school to spend time together. The girl had many friends, so she regularly stopped by to visit someone. Especially now that she and her mother had picked out a lovely fabric, the student could have simply visited one of her friends to show it off. A meeting with friends was also planned for the weekend, so Cian could have visited some of her future guests to discuss the upcoming event. But soon, her mother began to worry. Cian was well behaved and never left the house for long periods without permission. As a precaution, Linda decided to call several friends whose children were in contact with her daughter. The woman wanted to make sure the girl was with them, but to her mother's horror, no one had seen Cian. By 8 p.m., the student had still not come home. Although it was a small, quiet town with little crime, Cian always adhered to the agreed-upon time and never went out after sunset. Of course, on Friday evening, people started to relax and go for walks after their hard work. In the darkness, even the safest small town could become a very dangerous place. The adult woman understood this, and finally, Linda decided to take the route her daughter regularly took by bicycle. The path on the right side was the shortest route from their house on the outskirts to the shops in town. Together with her husband, they followed this path and found Cyan's yellow bicycle lying abandoned halfway along. The girl was nowhere to be seen, and there seemed to be no trace of her. Nevertheless, the abandoned bicycle was more than suspicious. It was the girl's first vehicle of her own, and she valued it greatly. Cyan had wanted it for a long time. The bike was a big achievement for the schoolgirl, and she would never have left it unattended. Unfortunately, the girl was not found nearby. Her parents called out for her, but no one responded. Linda and her husband naturally decided to go to the police. The couple stopped by the house to make sure she hadn't returned. Armed with a photo of Cyan, they went to the police station. The officers took the parents' report about their daughter's disappearance and immediately declared the child missing. Everyone knew that the town was a close-knit community with virtually no crime, so it was assumed that the girl would be quickly found and that it was just a simple misunderstanding. Perhaps the teenager was with a friend or had gotten lost during a walk in the woods. Nonetheless, the parents' words aroused great suspicion, which the officers didn't dare to voice in order not to frighten the parents in advance. One of the officers remembered that there had been an abduction in the area shortly before this incident. The officers decided to contact the local media. Since there were no social networks and no internet, they opted for classic methods. The morning news reported on Cyan's disappearance, assuming that in this way they would at least find some witnesses who had seen the 12-year-old student the previous night. Several people contacted the station, providing information to the police. Simultaneously, they all claimed not to have seen any suspicious situations. As it turned out, the witnesses had noticed Linda and Cyan when they were choosing fabric for a future dress. No one, however, had seen the girl on her way home, let alone anyone walking along the path at that time. Witnesses gave different explanations. Attempts were made to highlight suspicions, such as strange cars or other residents behaving unusually, but no one saw anyone following Linda and Cyan. One witness spoke of a dirty white station wagon from an older model seen that evening. When he contacted the police, he reported that there was a dark-haired man and a slender woman in the passenger compartment of the car. They seemed to be aimlessly driving around, perhaps looking for someone. Witnesses had seen the suspicious couple shortly before their disappearance. The police handling the case counted the vehicles, and the authorities identified about 170,000 station wagons in the area, of which around 10,000 were white. This greatly expanded the search area. It was necessary to familiarize themselves with all the vehicles in the region and verify other leads. Dozens of police officers and hundreds of volunteers were involved in the search. Many relatives, friends, and neighbors of the family, as well as other affected people, volunteered in the search for the girl. Ground and air search resources were used. Photos were taken from the site where the teenager disappeared and then published in the media. This is a standard method used to awaken witnesses' memories of the day's events. Unfortunately, no one was able to provide the law enforcement authorities with valuable information. However, by Sunday, several new witnesses came forward and significantly advanced the investigation. The first witness was sunbathing near a creek in the woods when she was attacked by an unknown man. He harassed the victim and tried to drag her into his vehicle, which turned out to be the aforementioned white Holden Kingwood station wagon. A second witness saw this moment and helped the woman fend off the attacker. The man then pursued the vehicle as its driver attempted to flee the scene, but he soon lost sight of it. He was able to describe the car in detail and give the police the vehicle's license plate number. It was 429. The investigators decided to check this number against the police database, and it turned out that this license plate was indeed registered in the area. They managed to determine that the vehicle belonged to a woman named Wilma Bigg. The investigators quickly found her address and went to the house where the car's owner lived. An older man opened the door for them and confirmed that he knew the owner of the vehicle. According to the man, he was not related to Wilma, but his stepson Barry turned out to be her husband. They had been married for about a year. Barry's description closely matched the portrait created based on a witness's words from the incident at the creek. The suspect's name was Barry John Watts. The officers had no grounds to arrest him or accuse him of the girl's abduction. However, the owner of the vehicle and her husband were now considered suspects. Unfortunately, the man didn't know where the couple was, but he mentioned that they frequently changed residences, renting apartments, and constantly moving around, which seemed suspicious. 3 days after Cyan's disappearance, the police were contacted by another witness. This man also described a white Holden Kingwood that had been seen near the creek. He described the driver as having an athletic build and the woman as a plump figure. Both were acting very suspiciously. An hour after this statement, the police conducted a background check on Wilma and Barry. It turned out that both had been released from prison in Perth, Western Australia, just before the events occurred. Both had extensive criminal records. Only a few weeks before these events, the two had moved from Perth to Queensland to escape strict supervision after being released on parole. The criminals arrived in their sedan, but almost immediately exchanged it for a white station wagon, which had already been involved in several suspicious incidents. The police realized that they were dealing with dangerous criminals who had more than one crime on their record. Their offenses included armed robberies, burglaries, forgery of documents needed to obtain rights, fraudulent activities, and that was only part of these criminals' record. For the Kingi family, this was, of course, terrible news. If their daughter had been involved with these people, the chances of finding her alive and unharmed were minimal. Barry was 33 years old at the time. His wife Wilma was 43. The woman had 6 children from previous relationships. Both were considered extremely dangerous criminals and were wanted by the police. Now, the police urgently needed to locate the couple and determine if they had anything to do with the schoolgirl's disappearance. Meanwhile, 6 days after Cyan's disappearance, a man named Tim arrived at the police station with bad news. He said that on the previous evening, on his way to work, he had noticed a foul smell in a park, which caught his attention because he thought that perhaps an animal had died. On his way back, he became even more curious because the unbearable smell of decomposition was still present in the same spot. Off the road, near a creek, he found the body of a teenager. The girl was dressed in a school uniform and had blonde hair. The police officers arrived at the location immediately. There, they found the mutilated body of the student. The girl had clearly been sexually assaulted. There were also strangulation marks on her neck from a foreign object, as well as 12 stab wounds on her body. 3 of the stab wounds were located around the heart, and 2 had cut through her throat. The girl's spine was broken, and her arms were so mutilated that they were practically detached from her body. The student's death was extremely agonizing. The police immediately assumed that the missing girl was in front of them. She was wearing the same clothes and matched her mother's description. The coroner confirmed in the lab that the found victim was indeed the 12-year-old Cyan Kingi. 5 days after the gruesome discovery, the family and friends of the child gathered to say their goodbyes at her funeral. During the farewell ceremony, one of her classmates read a passage from Peter Pan, suggesting that his friend would forever remain a child. Flowers were laid along the path near the place where the tortured girl was found. After the media made the incident public, another woman contacted the police. It was a nurse named Nicole Close. She reported that she had also seen suspicious people driving a white station wagon in the area. One day, after finishing her shift at the hospital in the late afternoon, the witness was walking across the parking lot to her car when she noticed a white vehicle driving slowly and sneaking up on her. Nicole immediately felt that something was wrong, so she ran to her car, jumped inside, and locked the door. The station wagon didn't reverse, but stopped at the passenger door, and a man got out. He approached the window and asked for help with directions on a map to find a specific place. The driver seemed calm and friendly enough, which made the nurse hesitate and even step out of her car. She wanted to end the conversation quickly because she noticed a suspicious-looking woman in the station wagon and also thought she saw some ropes lying on the back seat. Moreover, the nurse felt scared, as if she was in danger. The man behaved very calmly and politely, and with every word, he took a small step closer to the nurse. Nicole explained the directions several times, but he kept repeating the question and kept getting closer. When he was only a few steps away from the nurse, she saw a stranger walking across the parking lot. The driver of the white car noticed him too, looked away, and hesitated. Taking advantage of the situation, the witness jumped back into her car. The nurse shut the door and simply drove away. According to her, the incident occurred on November 2nd, so well before Cian's disappearance. The investigators didn't consider the whole story about the white car a coincidence and followed up on the lead. They showed the new witness several photos, and she clearly identified Wilma Baker and Barry Watts among a lineup of unknown faces. But even that wasn't the end of the witness statements. The day after this statement, a new eyewitness came forward at the station and reported another attempted abduction. He said he had seen a stranger attack a woman on the street, hold a knife to her throat, and try to drag her into his car. It was again a white station wagon. The victim, however, began to fight back and even managed to injure the attacker's hand with his own knife before she could break free and escape. Luckily, the police were able to find fingerprints on her car that belonged to the suspect, Barry Watts. They also identified a number of perpetrators who were probably planning abductions, rapes, and murders in the area. The officers realized that some particularly dangerous criminals were roaming freely and posing a threat to the entire region, so they issued a warning. The two criminals were also placed on the wanted list, along with the white car that the couple was driving. Information about the wanted individuals was shared with the media. The criminals seemed to have gone underground, but now, with the alert in place, their data was available to all police stations in the country. It was only a matter of time before they were caught. In a small town, an employee of the local electricity company was busy installing power lines when he accidentally discovered a car that resembled the description of the station wagon the criminals were using. He remembered this thanks to a media report he had seen a few days earlier. After confirming that the vehicle was indeed being sought by the police, he immediately went to the station and pointed out on a map where he had seen the vehicle. When the police patrol arrived at the scene, it turned out that the criminals had already fled. The officers were on their trail, but were once again unable to catch them. The department received information about a money transfer made by the suspects while they were on their way out of New South Wales. The station wagon was located in a hotel parking lot. Fortunately, it was still parked there when the police arrived. The hotel staff granted access to the fugitive's room. The officers were well aware that they were dealing with particularly dangerous criminals who might be armed, so they kept their weapons ready. Contrary to the officers' expectations, the suspects offered no resistance and were arrested in the hotel room. The officers found wigs, hair dye, and a hair-cutting machine, which indicated that the couple was trying to change their appearance to successfully evade the police. The interrogation of the suspects lasted about 12 hours. During this time, Barry Watts did not attempt to escape, nor did he say anything to the police. In addition, there was obviously a conspiracy between him and his wife to stick to the same story and not reveal any valuable information. Nevertheless, the police managed to break Wilma Baker relatively quickly. The woman believed she could mitigate her punishment by cooperating and told the authorities a story that would make anyone's blood run cold. According to the criminal's version, on November 27th, she and her husband wandered the streets of the town. The reason for this was the search for a new victim, as Barry was obsessed with violence against women and especially preferred victims who were much younger than him. His wife was 10 years older and far from his ideal. To satisfy his unhealthy lust, Barry began to rape and kill those who were younger and prettier, matching his taste, and Wilma simply went along with it because she was a frailing in the relationship and getting a divorce, or so she claimed. On that fateful day, Barry decided to find the girl at any cost and be her first man. His wife was supposed to help him kidnap the child, and she agreed to do so. That Friday morning, they drove around for hours. The criminals thought it wouldn't be difficult to catch a girl. In reality, however, most potential victims were in groups, making it impossible to abduct one of them quietly. Initially, Barry tried to speak to several victims himself, but they managed to get away. Eventually, he realized that he was far less trustworthy than his wife and decided to use Wilma as bait to lure the victims. They then stopped near a local park and took a walk. On their way, the perpetrators saw an attractive girl riding her yellow bicycle leisurely. Barry chose her. Wilma waved to her in a friendly manner, and the unsuspecting child was asked to help the woman, who appeared to be struggling to catch her dog. The girl was distracted and started talking to Wilma, trying to be helpful, as she was naturally good-hearted. At that moment, Barry attacked Cyan from behind. He covered her mouth with his hand and dragged her into his dirty vehicle. There, the criminal wrapped tape around her and tied her up. Wilma stayed with the child in the back seat, while her husband took the driver's seat. Altogether, they drove several kilometers away from the abduction site and stopped in the woods. Here, the pervert laid out a large blanket and began to rape the girl. For several hours, he fulfilled his most depraved fantasies. According to Barry's wife, Cyan didn't cry during this torture, not even once. She was very brave, endured everything, and did what the criminal told her to do, apparently in the hope that she would be released. Wilma also thought that Cyan didn't need to be killed and could simply be left here once her husband was done. But he never intended to leave her alive from the start. To satisfy his sick fantasies, the man began to strangle and stab the schoolgirl. The injuries were fatal for the 12-year-old, and Wilma watched the entire time. The woman reported that the belt used to strangle the girl, the knife, and the blanket were all thrown into a nearby creek. The police went to the scene, and everything the woman described was indeed found. At the supposed site of the rape and murder, they discovered light-colored hair that seemed to belong to Cyan. Wilma's confession was 28 pages long. She described in great detail all the horrors that Cyan endured before her death. The police never managed to break Barry, but he was furious when he learned of his wife's confession. To ensure that the man would be put behind bars, the investigators wanted to obtain his confession, but it was impossible to crack him. Therefore, the officers resorted to a rather sophisticated method. It was suggested that an undercover officer be placed in the temporary holding cell where Barry was being held. He was to spend all his time pretending to be a regular inmate. The undercover officer's task was to get to know the criminal, befriend him, and thus obtain a confession. A 32-year-old police officer was selected for this dangerous mission. After all, he had to hear the confession of the brutal massacre of a schoolgirl and couldn't show any disgust toward the perpetrator. During the entire operation, the officer struggled to suppress the urge to strangle Barry. After the operation, he was so emotionally drained that he had to take a sick leave to recover. However, the mission was a failure. It was impossible to obtain a confession. The extent of this monster's brutality was staggering. The forensic experts called the murder of Cyan the most brutal case in their experience. But Barry remained undeterred and was determined to avoid punishment at all costs. During one of the meetings with his wife, he subtly suggested that she should take her own life before the trial so that she wouldn't have to testify against him, because otherwise she would be unhappy. According to state law, the witness's testimony would then be invalid. Generally, he communicated very carefully with his wife and chose his words meticulously to ensure that the authorities couldn't use the phone conversation as evidence of his guilt. Fortunately, Wilma didn't listen to her husband. When the couple was brought to court, around 200 people gathered at the entrance, wanting to look the brutal murderers in the eye. Everyone was concerned that the likelihood was high that the people would try to lynch the murderers. But to the surprise of the authorities, everyone remained silent as these monsters were led through the crowd. The townspeople were simply relieved that the police had ensured the safety of the town. A police officer was even moved to tears by this reaction. During the trial, Wilma testified against her husband and portrayed him as a true monster. In doing so, she tried to justify herself, claiming that she had been forced into this gruesome act by violence. In reality, however, there was every reason to believe that the woman had willingly participated in all of this. She herself shared an interesting fact, mentioning that she was related to another convicted serial killer in Perth. While in prison, she met Catherine Burney, who was involved in the murder business with her partner. The matronly criminal said that sex during the murder was the most powerful and pleasurable experience of her life. After she shared this, Barry became obsessed with the idea. On October 28th, the jury deliberated the verdict. It took 3 hours for the jury to find the criminals guilty. Wilma Baker received 10 years for kidnapping, 3 years for rape, and a life sentence for murder. Thanks to her cooperation with the prosecution, however, she remained eligible for parole. The deliberations on Barry's sentencing lasted 6 hours. The pervert was found guilty of murder, kidnapping, and rape. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and his case was placed in the no-release file. However, the couple's story didn't end in prison. Barry began boasting to his cellmates about his criminal achievements and told them that he had been involved in a similar crime. The criminal spoke about the massacre of 31-year-old teacher Helene Mary Fenley, who had disappeared on October 29, 1988. As it turned out, Wilma was also involved in this incident. It was determined that Helene had caught Barry during an attempted car theft. Wilma admitted that she saw her husband kill the teacher, after which they put the body in the trunk and dumped it at a landfill near Brisbane. At the same time, Barry remained silent despite the police's efforts to get him to speak. He provided no information about the second victim, Helene Fenley, likely because he hoped to challenge his conviction for Cyan's murder in the future. Nevertheless, in 2007, a confession regarding Cyan's murder was obtained from him. The criminal confirmed that he had killed her. He described in detail what had happened, and his story matched Wilma Baker's testimony. Wilma suffered from attacks by her fellow inmates. She was regularly beaten and was once severely injured by a blow to the head with a tin can. To prevent her from being beaten to death, she was transferred to a more secure prison. Here, she converted to Christianity and seemed to be on the path to reform. The woman applied for parole 3 times, but each time it was denied. In 2007, she divorced her murderous husband. The woman had serious health problems. She was overweight and diabetic. In 2008, her condition worsened so much that the doctors had to place her in a medically induced coma immediately after a heart surgery. The police hoped that she would make a few more confessions about other crimes on her deathbed. The couple was suspected of committing many more abductions, rapes, and murders in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, Wilma died at the age of 64 without regaining consciousness, taking all the information about the criminal activities of these vile creatures to the grave. This heavy burden, of course, still lies on Barry. The law enforcement authorities are confident that the criminal will never confess to further crimes. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.